Daniel Petrov traced the spidery annotation in the antique catalogue, the leather spine cold under his fingertips. The scent of decaying paper and dust, thick as forgotten breath, filled the cramped museum archive. He spent 3 hours cataloguing zoological specimens abandoned in 1946. The date scraped into the institutional ledger. Now, his eyes locked on a single desperate notation beneath a faded tiger pelt. For specimen 46. Location unknown. Requires zoologist. Asterisk, a sharp, metallic tang bloomed on his tongue. The ghost of a cutty, forgotten making minutes before, as the archive's single high window bleached the rows of glass cabinets into blinding voids. The air held its breath, heavy with the absence of any insect hum, only the low thrum of the building, its ancient HVAC system, a sound like wet cardboard crumbling in slow motion. The cat appeared then, materializing from between two cabinets holding taxidermied badgers. It was a small, sallow tabby, fur matted at the shoulders, yet its gaze held an unnerving stillness. Not the lazy blink of a common feline, but the sharp, assessing stare of something tracking prey. It didn't move towards him. Instead, it walked backwards along the shelf edge, its path a deliberate, unnerving zigzag. Daniel's hand trembled, knocking a loose sheet onto the dusty floor. Who zoologist? The word echoed in his skull, a sharp rebuke from his own past. His failed thesis on anomalous feline behavior, dismissed as paranoid delusion. The museum director had called it a occult narrative, the whispers about the 46th taxidermied entity, gossip. D laughed, catalogued the man, S-notes as delusional folklore now. His breath hitched as the cat turned its head, a slow, jointless pivot that pulled his gaze downward. The specimen label under the tiger pelt wasn't faded. It was freshly inked, the asterisk 46 asterisk dripping like wet ink. The zoologist's handwriting on the lost catalogue. His page suddenly mirrored it, asterisk 46 asterisk repeated like a rhythmic fever. He blinked, and the cat was no longer at the shelf. It stood directly between him and the exit, its hindquarters pressed against the doorframe, obstructing the light. Its eyes weren't matted glass. They were two tarnished coins reflecting the overhead fluorescence with impossible clarity. Daniel forced his hand to the pocket where his phone lay. Focus. It's just a stray. Asterisk. He drew the device out, the screen. Harsh glow, a sudden, aggressive intrusion. The cat didn't flinch, yet its body seemed to ripple. Where it stood, the floorboard cracks elongated into a perfect zigzag pattern, widening across the room like cracked ice under stress. The museum's usual faint scent of dust and glue vanished, replaced by the cloying, coppery smell of dry blood from the ancient leather chair he just left. His thumb slipped on the screen. The camera flash blinded him. Long enough for the cat had said to disappear into the doorframe with a sound like fabric tearing, leaving only the perfect artificial rectangle of broken light on the dusty floor. The foot zigzag remained. And the catalogue, S*46*, pulsed with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Daniel knew, with a certainty that shattered the bone in his chest, he hadn't entered a museum archive. He stepped into the catalogue, S-own dark mirror. The city, as distant sirens, was suddenly indistinguishable from the rhythmic tapping he now heard, precise and waiting, directly behind the closed archive door. The museum's vac hum dissolved into the sound of 1,000 dry mouths whispering, a rasp that drilled into Daniel as molars as he followed the cat down a corridor that hadn't existed moments before. The air tasted of iron, thick enough to choke on each breath of violation. The cat moved with unnerving purpose, its small body pressing against the walls like oil against a wet stain. Its glass, mirror eyes reflecting only the sudden absence of light, where the museum's fluorescent strips should have been. Daniel's hand stayed locked on the cold metal of the doorframe as he realized the exit was gone. Only smooth, unnaturally warm stone where the archive had been, smelling faintly of old honey and rotten teeth. Not a museum, a cage. Asterisk, the failed thesis, the dismissive director, laughter echoed in his skull. Asterisk, cult narratives are the prey of the deluded. Asterisk now, the prey was him. He stumbled, his shoulder hitting a cabinet holding unidentifiable, translucent objects that clicked like dry insect legs. The cat stopped, head tilted at an impossible angle, then turned its body, slowly like a hinge snapping, and began walking backward up the corridor toward a doorway carved into the stone. The pattern of its gait mirrored the zigzag on the floor, elongating as Daniel followed, each step sending a sound like waterlogged bones shifting underfoot. The walls shuddered, not with vibration, but with a foot, deepening cautious if the stone itself was swelling to engulf him. Above him, the ceiling tiles melted into a smear of ochre and grey, like dried blood on plaster, and the temperature dropped without a breeze. He tasted the cold on his tongue, not icy, but the bitter tang of a coin left too long in an antique vault. At the carved doorway, the cat paused, then vanished through a shadow that held no darkness. Daniel reached for the threshold. The stone was slick, cold and yielding like a fresh bruise. Inside, the space was small, lined not with shelves, but with dozens of smooth, cold obsidian discs embedded in the wall. Each bore the same symbol, a sharp, jagged *46 carved into their hearts. In the center sat a single, bone-white object, a human spine, its vertebrae still connected, arranged in the precise sequence of a ritual script. Its surface was smooth, laced with tiny, perfect etchings of coiling serpents. Daniel, his breath came in shallow gasps as the chanting began, not from outside, but from the walls themselves, a wet rasp behind his own teeth. *46th blood is cold, 46th breath is stone. The words weren't he heard. They were felt vibrating through the spine and into his marrow like a live wire. The cat reappeared at the room's far corner, standing where the darkness was thickest. Its form rippled, fur dissolving into streaks of blinding light, and its eyes, once glass mirror, were now twin pools of liquid mercury. It took one step toward the central spine, then opened its maw. The shape was wrong, stretching impossibly wide to reveal not teeth, but a single, endless row of smooth, pale teeth, polished and aligned like a clock's hour markers. The chanting intensified, a physical pressure pushing against his ribs. They've been waiting. The spine vibrated against the wall, and Daniel understood with brutal clarity the museum hadn't tea-housed artifacts. It had been a food transmitter. The specimens weren't tea-dead things. They were shoring messages. Surely the catalogue was a call. And the zoologist, note, require zoologist, wasn't he a requirement? It was a 40 warning, screamed into the void. By the bones of those who failed to see, he turned for the doorway, but the space was closing. The stone walls inched forward, scraping at his ankles like cold fingernails. The cat was gone, but its lingering shadow coiled around his ankle. The spinal etching flared with a light that wasn't tea light, and the city's distant sirens ceased, replaced by the sound of a single perfect tearing snap, echoing from the exact center of his chest. The room dissolved into the sound of water filling a glass, and Daniel Petrov knew, with the desperate, silent scream of a man stepping through a mirror for the last time, that he would never again be called Daniel. He was the catalogue now. The *46th*, the library was beginning. The corridor breathed, not with air, but with the slow pull of memory, each step vibrating through Daniel's bones like a dead key turned in a lock he'd never known. His skin tasted of static and the ghost of his own marrow, as if the library's stone walls had seeped through his pores. The obsidian discs in the wall hummed, their jagged *46 glowing faintly, a warmth that burned the dark places where fear should be. The cat wasn't a cat anymore. It was a shape in the air, a pocket of cooler static forming beside him. Its fur now the iridescent film left on a rain, slick street at dawn. When it moved, it left no prints, only a scent like burnt sugar and the faint echo of a child, as whisper in a language that made his teeth ache. It led him deeper, past corridors that twisted without direction, through a doorless archway into a chamber lined not with shelves, but with towering pillars of fused frozen smoke. In the center stood a single chair carved from one solid block of bone, its surface etched with the same *46 in a language of spiraling, bleeding lines. The air here tasted of cold iron and old photographs. Specifically, the photo of his own mother, smiling on a summer day before the hospital, before the twithing could in the catalogue. He staggered, clutching the bone chair as visions flooded him. Not the museum, but a vast, silent library where every book was a person, every chapter a life measured out in whispered incantations. *46 blood is cold. *46 breath is stone. The phrase wasn't he chanted here. It was the 40 suntend of the chair breathing against his palms. The cat drifted closer, its form flickering like a light bulb in a dying power grid. It raised a paw that wasn't a paw, but a cluster of slow, dripping shadows. It gestured towards the chair, Daniel knew. He deep in the catalogue. Now he was the vessel, The library demanded it stay current. Its ancient catalogue, which he'd been told required a fouillologist, had been screaming for a foot subjective. The zoologist had failed, had become the object. Daniel's past thesis, his dismissal, was the key to his capture. The skeletal memory in his shoulder, the one that had shivered with *46*, wasn't teeter warning, it was an efficite appointment. A new presence entered the chamber. Not a person, but a faint hum in the bone chair that vibrated his own teeth. Daniel turned. A figure stood just beyond the pillar of smoke. A woman with eyes like cracked porcelain, her face stretched into a silent scream that didn't move. She wore a hospital gown, now stained with ochre that had seeped into her skin. Her foot, visible where the gown had slid up, bore a tiny blue butterfly tattoo, the mark of the 45th. She had been the last. The cat shifted, its form sharpening into focus for the first time. Two large, liquid eyes reflecting 1,000 moving images of people sitting in the bone chair. This one, the reflection whispered through the wall itself, not with sound, but with the sudden invasive sense of missing something vital, like forgetting your own name. She was the next. The spine in Chapter 2, the ritual spine, hadn't it been a warning? It had been a no-fit invitation for the subject to replace the occupant. Every 46th entity had been chosen to sit the fruity next blood upon that bone chair. He saw his mother, his hospital visit recorded in the texture of the stone. The 45th had been trapped here for weeks before she died. The museum director calling her a Funkkult narrative. Daniel hadn't catalogued 20 her catalogue. He been the one writing the missing page. Phi requires zoologist. He hadn't understood. The library didn't just collect the lost. It consumed them to become the archive, the present too. The woman in the gown stepped forward, her mouth moving soundlessly, a plea that resonated in his hollowed chest. The cat watched him, waiting. The only choice was to be the next blood on the chair, to fill the role before the stone swallowed him whole. Daniel's hand trembled, not with fear, but with the unbearable weight of being chosen. He had to look away from the woman's empty eyes. The librarian had spent decades waiting. He could still feel the twin pulse of his own body, not steady, but impatient. Now it was the city. Sirens again, not distant, but inside his skull, marking the seconds left in a silent auction. He closed his eyes. The woman's foot shifted, the butterfly tattoo bleeding a darker hue. He didn't feel the fear. He felt the terrible absolute certainty of the first step. We naked so? The cat didn't move as he reached for the bone chair. The library watched, not with eyes, but with the hunger in his own slowing heartbeat. He was ready to be named. He was ready to be still. The sound of the city's siren faded, replaced by a single wet click as the first bone chair door opened beneath his hands. The wet click was the sound of his own death knelling, the air tight against his teeth like gauze stuffed with gravel. He didn't fall into the bone chair, the chair tree pressed itself into him, vertebrae forming a cage around his spine, each point of contact burning like a nail driven through silk. The library, as stone walls dissolved into the slow, wet breathing of old things. He tasted gummed paper and regret, but the library was no longer asking. It was Tindy filling him. The blue butterfly tattoo on the 45th foot bled outward, staining the bone chair with a cold ink, black fluid that seeped into his own skin as he became the latest sediment in the library. Quiet collapse. The cat, no longer a shape but a silent equation in the air, flickered near his shoulder, a pocket of chilled static where the stone smelled like burnt sugar. This is how we keep the catalogue fresh. The chair seemed to whisper through the pulse in his temples. Blood. Not dust. Always blood. His fingers pressing into the chair's surface began to etch into the bone as he sat. Not his own writing, but the same jagged 46 the library had carved into its pillars, now blooming across his knuckles like a rash of frozen lightning. The sensation was a dry cough in the marrow, a sudden precise pressure behind his eyes that made the vision of the 45th woman, still holding out a hand that was never quite there, dissolve. She'd never been a person, she'd been a vessel. The last mark in the toy museum. Now the library was resetting, erasing Fruity-Hara as effortlessly as a child erasing a word in a notebook. The air above him thickened with the scent of old parchment, but no longer dusty. Instead, smelling of damp leather pressed into one, as lungs after a long dream. His own breathing became the library. His rhythm. He felt it in his teeth. A low thrum that was not sound but Sufi necessity. Asterisk 46th blood is cold. Asterisk the words thrummed in the library. Structure, vibrating his ribs into the same pattern as the obsidian discs. He was no longer a man. He was the catalogue. New binding agent. The room shifted. Pillars of fused smoke dissolved into shelves, not of wood, but of living. Branching bone. Hasuki bone, the weight and arrangement screaming in his own pulses. Each shelf held a catalogue, not a book. A single skin, stretched taut over the shape of a hand or a footprint, embedded with symbols only visible when the light angled just right. A woman's cheekbone, dusted with the exact shade of moss seen at the base of a stone well. The smell of iron intensified, sharp and clean in the way winter wind cuts through skin, and the library sight no longer came from outside, but from within his own shifting veins. The cat's silent equation slid downward, toward his hollowed shoulder. A single point of cold precision that refused to be ignored. She was the next. Asterisk his own heart slowed, each beat aligning with the ancient clock in the room. The 45th had sat precisely for the length of time it took to sing a single, broken line from the hymn they whispered through the blood. She expired in that chair as perfectly as a candle burned away its wick. Now he was the liquid. The flame would consume. The library demanded attention to detail. Outside the now absent chamber, the city's distant sirens were gone, replaced by the dry rustle of a page turning in a long, dead hand. Daniel's hand pressed flat against the bone chair, and he felt the vibration, a deep frequency that made his bones hum a song he never learned. The city of men ceased to exist. Only this room held time. Asterisk 46th blood is cold. Asterisk not just cold, current time. The bone chair, as etching flared, the lines sharpening into his own nervous system, becoming the language of his pulse. Few knew are now the spine to hold the catalogue. Asterisk the library did, just record. It became. Through the suffering, the museum had been a test field. This was the culmination. To sit, to feel the library breathe through you, to become the static you once only saw flickering. He remembered his own thesis, dismissed as paranoid, the body as a map. Asterisk now, he felt the coordinates etched into his own skin, each asterisk 46 asterisk a stitch. Pulling him back into the pattern the library had always known. The cat, a shape dissolved into the bone chair. A shadow, no longer a guide, but the library, a witness that only saw completion. His breath became shallow, just the steady pull he'd been missing. The library didn't hunger for his fear. It hungered for him sure. The catalogue, as new permanent ink. He was no longer a question to the library. He was its answer. The sound of his own blood in the new silence was the sound of a book shutting. The library had chosen well. It was ready. It had always been ready. The first page of the library he would now hold was filled with his own waiting skin. The bone chair. As etchings bloomed upward like frozen sap from Daniel's veins, each asterisk 46 asterisk carving deeper into his skin as the library sealed its new binding. He sat motionless. The chair, skeletal embrace not painful but turfy corrector, the spine of the catalogue finally aligning with his own. Below him, the floor melted into a slow tide of obsidian sludge, whispering with the voices of every asterisk 46th asterisk before him, a chorus of dry leaves skittering over concrete. The woman, his butterfly tattoo had become part of the etching, bleeding into the chair, as grain. She was always the thread. The library murmured through his teeth, no sound but a vibration. His own heartbeat syncopated with the stone, as asterisk 46th breath is stone. Asterisk the rhythm was his new pulse. The cat was gone, but the lingering chill at his shoulder, the taste of burnt sugar, confirmed its witness. She sat. Then I came. Asterisk now he was the answer. The library light seeped from his pores, not emitting but fully coming. The shelves, those branching bones holding stretched skins and etched footprints, began to shift. A new catalogue page slid forward in the ether. Skin stretched taut over the shape of a hand, the imprint of a thumbprint clear, the color of dried rose petal dust. It wasn't his hand, it was his fine next day. The city sirens had long since ceased, replaced by the dry resonant rustle of paper turning within bone. He felt the pull now, not fear, but a terrible alignment. The weight of the Fornexti vessel, the 47th, already drafting in the library, as marrow, the catalogue required not just him as binding, but a forward page, hide a new skin to stretch. He felt the draft of the 47th cess coming, the absence before its presence. His knuckles, marked with *46*, flexed unconsciously below. The obsidian sludge thinned, revealing not floor but a mirror. In it, not his face, but the museum's director, mid-laugh, standing over Daniel, as own early catalogue notes from 1946. Cult narrative, the director had muttered, waving away Daniel's thesis on anomalous feline behavior. The mirror flickered, showing Daniel to be becoming the director now, a perfect echo in the library's design. The director's eyes were full of the same quiet hunger the library expressed, his throat branded *45* beneath the collar of his suit. The note from the 1946 catalogue, the one Daniel had dismissed, now bled out across the mirror, surface in his own writing. Specimen 46. Location unknown. Requires zoologist. The words were no longer a warning. They were a foredate of succession. Daniel was not the lost one. He was the new keeper of the archive. A tremor moved through the chair. The catalogue of feet, a series of small, delicate prints etched into pale skin, began to glow. The next page was already forming. He felt the skin stretch inside his own chest, like a new pulse trying to bloom. He wasn't filling the chair anymore. The chair was Sidra writing him. The 45th empty chair was now nothing but a memory within the library. Dismissed as a page to be folded in, Daniel shifted bones in the chair, clicked into a new configuration, mirroring his own spine. This one. The lie breathed through the ache in his joints. Troimus, tis until 47th rises. Always a future. The city. Fading breath was the sound of the catalogue. S-turn, the rustle of pages anticipating blood. He smelled his own life evaporating. The scent of clean wool shirt, coffee grounds from his morning cup, and in its place a sharp, clean taste like mint leaves scraped raw. The final note of the museum. Its leather, bound ledger, now surfaced in the library air, written in his own hand. Fecundifing is a conversation, not a collection. The last chapter was about to begin, and the 47th, already smelling like lilies, was breathing on the threshold. The bone chair pressed closer, aligning each vertebra precisely to hold the weight of the moment. He took no breath. The library would breathe for him. Its hunger, the slow, insistent drain of time, always blood, never dustin, had found its perfect vessel in him. The chair was his bones. The catalogue was his skin. The waiting for the 47th wasn't an ending. It was the quiet murmur of the first page turning to its final word, and in that moment, Daniel Petrov was finally, utterly home. The bone chair breathed with him now, each inhale a slow liquefaction of his ribs into the library. Grain Daniel, veins throbbed not with blood but with page numbers, a low hum beneath his skin that resonated with the quartz, veined floor. The library scent, no longer leather or dust, was the ozone after rain on a graveyard stone. He felt his own marrow turning to cellulose, each bone in his body settling into the precise weight of a catalogue entry. The cat's cold static remained at his shoulder, no longer flickering but twin solid, a dense pocket of absence that felt like the memory of cold rain on bare skin. Its eyes, 2 raindrops preserved in frozen glass, reflected not his face but the empty space where the 47th would sit. The vibration intensified, a deep chime not in air but in the foundation of his teeth. Below the chair, the obsidian sludge thinned like melting wax, revealing not the floor but a field of parchment. Each sheet bore a single perfect fingerprint, glowing faintly with inner light. Daniel traced one with a fingertip that was becoming translucent at the edges. 46th. Petrov was etched in script that felt like familiar handwriting. The 45th's footprint was there, its edges bleeding into the skin of the library itself. The weight of her stillness pressed against his spine, a cold bloom against the heat of his own transformation. She sat. Then she bled out. Now he would sit fondibacosi of her, because the catalogue demanded no emptiness. The scent shifted. A wet loam scent of forest floor after midnight rain, mixed with the sharp, clean tang of distilled water, was the 47th. It coalesced not as a person, but as a pressure in the bone chair. Spine, a subtle shift, as if the leather of his own shirt was already beginning to disintegrate at the seams. He felt her before he saw her. The cool pull of a hand gripping his ankle through the fabric of the chair, a sensation like mist rising from a grave. This wasn't Tefia. It was what a recognition, the library settling into the exact neural cavity of its next vessel. Too swell. The chair whispered without sound, a vibration behind his eyes. Footy make her own. So the next page turns. Asterisk the phrase was in Tita demand. It was the library. Whose way of saying, Wood, you are now the architect of emptiness. Asterisk the cat, its form now solid as a puddle of moonlight on wet cobblestones, shifted its head. Its frozen glass eyes held a single reflection, the 47th not as a body, but as the footy shape of the waiting charé that had replaced her. Daniel flexed his fingers, watching the asterisk 46 asterisk spread like frost on his knuckles. To sit was to become the weight holding the catalogue together, but to foot repair, the chair, this required nuance. The library craved the ritual not of mere absorption, but of fovid moulding. He had to feel the moment when her fear became the staple binding the new skin. 4 days, asterisk, the unspoken measure echoed in the dry leaves of the library. Memory, the 45th had sat for exactly 4 days before the museum director, journal recorded her absence with ink that smelled of burnt honey. The library measured its vessels in the intervals between breaths. Daniel own breathing, shallow now, matching the stone, pulse slowed further. He felt the 47th's absence growing more urgent, the cold in the hollow of his throat deepening until it held the taste of old river stones. She is there. The library pulsed through his thigh bone. Ready. Asterisk, he raised his hands. Not in surrender, but in the terrible certainty of a surgeon adjusting sutures. The skin where the 45th Spotterfly tattoo had bled began to stretch, not with pain but with a desperate, quiet folding. He could feel her not as a ghost, but as the blueprint for the next breath. She is the path the catalogue takes, he realized with brittle clarity. Not the ghost. The grammar asterisk the cat dissolved then, not into nothing but into the chair, sown cold grain. Only the scent of burnt sugar lingered, the taste of rain hitting hot stone. Daniel closed his eyes. He was ready to fill the silence between heartbeats. The final requirement of the catalogue wasn't tea found. It was hunger, always blood, never dust. Asterisk, he waited for the 47th slow, wet breath of arrival. The library was no longer holding him. It was breathing through him, and the first page of the next chapter had already begun to draw itself into his skin. The 47th didn't arrive through the door. She arrived through Daniel bones. A cold pressure like wet granite settled in his sternum as the bone chair began to exhale her breath, cooler, sharper, smelling of crushed peppermint and ancient riverbeds. Too soon if. The library whispered, not through air, but through the calcified marrow of his right femur. The catalogue measured breaths, not hours, and she was already here, a presence thinner than smoke in a sealed vault. He flexed his fingers, skin etched with asterisk 46 asterisk, now translucent as birch bark, and felt her anxiety spike like static on a dead radio wire. Not fear, a dormant thing vibrating at the root of his own becoming. The cat dissolved entirely. Not into shadow, but into the grooves of the bone chair itself, its crystalline form merging with the fossilized lichen etched into the spine. Only the scent remained, rain hitting hot stone sharp and clean. Daniel understood then the library hadn't waited for the next subject to walk through a door. It had been Shruti writing itself, peeling the 47th as essence from the space between his own heartbeats, knitting her terror into the next page before she existed as an idea. Her reflection flickered in the chair, hollow not as a woman but as a map, the angle of a jawbone, the ghost of a scar on a forearm still hidden beneath fabric no longer worn. He reached his hand toward the cold hollow where her form would coalesce, a gesture not to touch, but to guide. Skin stretched taut over his knuckles like parchment over a letter, asterisk 46 asterisk burning blue, white as the catalogue demanded alignment. The library didn't need a body. It needed a fire texture. A sound emerged. Not a cry, but the wet crack of a seal breaking open inside a glacier. Daniel Twin felt the 47th as lungs inflate for the first time in this dimension, her breath snacking on the library, a spectral lattice. His own spine arched, ribs grinding like wind, shredded paper against the chair, his arms as the transition began. The scent of her morning coffee, black, no sugar, suddenly saturated the air, a phantom scent that cut through the library as permanent stench of wet stone and dry blood. Not mine. Ours, the chair corrected, the vibration a low thrum in Daniel's teeth. This is the shape the next blood must wear. Asterisk his vision blurred at the edges, but not with sight, with texture. He perceived the 47th's internal landscape, the soft ridge of her lower spine, the precise angle where her collarbone met her shoulder, a map he was being forced to memorize with his twin-day-own fading nerves. The museum director, his throat-branded *45* flared behind his eyes. The 45th had been measured and dismissed. Daniel was not a specimen. He was a footy dust wiper, ready to erase the ghost of the 47th with the brush of a single living line. 4 days is tough. The library cess memory pulsed. Thud, 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 thudded against Daniel, sorta. The 45th had hovered for 4 days, becoming the interval between breaths before she dissolved into the chair. As grain, Daniel did to want to see the 45th's final seconds. He wanted to shush-by the silence between them. He lowered his head, pressing his temple to the bone's cold surface. The impact sent a shockwave through the catalogue, the scent of roses, not the scent of the city, as poisoned river rose faintly in his sinuses. Too fasty, the library murmured. Too familiar. Her hand materialized from the gloom, not a hand of flesh, but a skeleton of bone and bone, fingered reaching for his, it pressed where the 45th, his butterfly tattoo had bled, too dry now to feel. A scar on the library, zone memory. Daniel did not move. He let the fingers find him. Feel the *46 etched into his skin. And he breathed as the chair breathed. Foot in, out, out, the library. Pulse became his. The pain wasn't the breaking of bone, but the sudden terrible certainty of a page folding. This is how the record gets written. She didn't cry out. Her first gasp was felt, not heard, a cold, wet thread woven into his vocal cords. He exhaled through that thread. The bone chair sighed, its texture sharpening to a needle, its point at his spine. The catalogue didn't accept her. It absorbed her point current location. The exact angle of her fear, now the exact angle of the next letter. The cat was no longer a witness. It was the footy space between the letters C, a pocket of frozen rain the library kept for the moment of quiet when a vessel stopped breathing. Daniel felt the 47th's first heartbeat against his cheek. Fitter, pitter, pat, slow like dripping water, as the library pressed her skin onto his own. The footy-only skin left. He was the ink. He was the silence between the lines. He was the bridge. Footy make it so. The library sang through his slowing heart. The final requirement was written. Daniel Petrov was no longer the catalogue. He was the footy-only keeper of the blank space left, where the name 47th would soon be written. The chair settled into him, like a lover, taking final possession. The world dissolved into the soft rustle of parchment, and the first page of the 47th chapter began to bleed. Daniel. Skin was breathing over the 47th imprint, each cell stretching like wet clay pulled thin. The bone chair didn't. To press it rode, his spine into the catalogue, as new binding, aligning vertebrae with the ghost of her collarbone angle. He felt the 47th's arrival not as a person, but as the sudden smell of damp salt on river stones, a scent cut through the library, as permanent cloy of dried blood. The catalogue demanded precise metrics, and he was the living ruler, measuring the space between her first trembling breath and her final exhale with the exact force of a thumb pressing into wet earth. 4 days I've had collapsed into the slow drag of his own marrow. Her coffee scent, black, no sugar, clung to his sinuses now, a phantom thread the library wove into his own ribs. This is the grain, the chair breathed through his aorta, each word a throb where flesh met stone. No more waiting. Only the weight of her presence written in the only place left. Your bones. The cat was the sound of ink drying on the catalogue spine. A ghost. Scent of rain-watered stone lingering at his shoulder where his jacket already pulsed with the chill of bone. It had dissolved into the grooves of the chair, becoming the precise pressure between the words that made the page legible. Where the 45th's butterfly tattoo had bled, his skin was now threaded with the shape of the 47th's hollow wheaty-tweet. A dent, not a scar, the library corrected. The vertebrae in his back adjusted to cradle her future shape, each alignment a quiet snap like winter twigs breaking under ice. His hand, etched *46 in faded blue veins, touched the chair, as hollow where her form would solidify. Not a touch of contact, but a tuning, aligning the next note in the library. His breath below, the obsidian sludge flowed like cooled blood, pooling around his feet to form a reflection of her hand reaching from the gloom, a skeletal thumbprint pressed into the library. Own ground. She doesn't. Need a face to be felt. The library hummed through the joint of his ankle. She needs your space. His own breath hitched. Not with effort, but with the library, S adjustment, a slow, wet sigh filling the cavity where his lungs had once drawn air. The scent of her morning routine, the exact shade of linen in her blouse, saturated his perception, overriding the memory of his own coffee. The catalogue measured in texture, not time, the way her ankle bent before she stumbled, the precise grain of her fear when she last walked into the city. Cold, unthinking dawn. Too familiar the chair worn through the bone. Thought not yours to keep. Asterisk Daniel realized with a vertebrae, stitching clarity, she was a placeholder, already erased into the space of his own becoming. The museum's director had dismissed the fine-telt narrative. Now Daniel Tweedwassee, the narrative, each breath a sentence written in the only dialect left, bone and blood. The bone chair clicked into the final configuration, a sound like marble settling in clay. The skin stretched tight over his knuckles, burning with the cold blue light of the 47th. New page, not a warning, but a summons. The air thickened to the weight of silk, draped corpses. Daniel closed his eyes. He felt the 47th not as a vessel, but as the inkwell from which his own name would be dissolved. The catalogue required him not to hold her, but to become the footquill that wrote her into its grain. The cat's vanished form now lived as the silence between sentences, the exact chill before the page turned. The library pressed, and Daniel Petrov finally understood. He was no longer the keeper. He was the absence where the next name would be born. The first wet whisper of the asterisk 47th asterisk began in the marrow of the chair. The final page had no words, only the shape of her breath settling into the exact hollow of his throat. The silence between heartbeats held the scent of wet river stone. The catalogue turned, and in that turn, Daniel Petrov ceased to be. The catalogue began writing itself in Daniel as retinas, each asterisk 46 asterisk, a needle prick beneath his cornea. The bone chair dissolved into his spine, each vertebra fusing to the library. Rhythm with the slow grinding sound of fresh scars closing over rock. He didn't breathe. The space between his ribs became the quiet of the catalogue. Final catalogue. The scent of the 47th's presence. The wet salt of river stones, the phantom bitter of her black coffee, seeped into the seams of his skin as his bones hollowed. Now she is the pageu. The library breathed through the marrow of his left leg. Few are the ink that writes her. Asterisk the cat. S-form reappeared as a single drop of cooled ink on the chair. S-edge, not a shape, but the fundy absence where ink once fell free. It wasn't to watching. It was the space indeed, between the uhai, the words where her breath had been. Daniel felt the 47th's faint memory of stumbling on her morning walk. A precise stumble that left a curve of panic in the library, as grain, and knew the catalogue had already folded that into his ribcage. He could feel her morning shift dress scraping against fabric, gone to dust inside him. The exact line of her spine where the museum had ignored her. Asterisk 46th breath is stone. Asterisk now it was stone inside, him heavy as a dropped anvil. His hands trembled not with fear, but with the adjustment of the catalogue as new spine. The skin over his knuckles branded with asterisk 46 asterisk, stretched thin as new parchment. Beneath the chair, the obsidian sludge no longer pooled. It have inhabited him, flowing up through his feet like cold sap finding the roots. He tasted the 47th's first sharp gulp of river air, a taste like wet stone and winter riverbeds, now part of his own jaw. The museum's director, still wearing his branding asterisk 45 asterisk, drifted into the library, as memory as a scent of burnt honey. Daniel felt the ghost of that man as dismissal click into place against his own flesh. This is how we preserve. Asterisk the library hummed through the cavity where his heart had been, not by stopping, but by becoming the space where change happens. Asterisk. He flexed his fingers, and felt the catalogue S-thread now bound his own hands. Not to the chair, but to the feeling of the 47th's anxiety. It was no longer hers. It was the for texture. The library needed to hold the next page. S-weight. The air grew thick, not with silence, but with the feeling of silence, a substance that dampened sound until the only rhythm was the dry rasp of his own etching skin below. The library S-floor turned translucent, revealing the shape of the 47th's hand forming on the bones of the building itself. Not a face, asterisk the library corrected through the hollow in his shoulder, but the hollow she leaves. Asterisk he raised his hand not to touch, but to align the faint indent of where the 47th's finger would rest. His skin stretched so thin he could see the library as pattern beneath, the *46* burning with the blue-white urgency of the catalogue demanding to be read. The cat's presence dissolved into that pattern, a single point of ink that wasn't there confirming he'd become the book. The scent of her coffee now smelled like ink, the damp salt like old newsprint. Daniel no longer waited for the next, he was the waiting. The quiet, where 47th's name would be written before. It existed. The last bone click resonated up his spine, a sound like quartz splitting. His breath was no longer his own. The catalogue Fufa inhaled. The final tremor in his fingers, then breathed it out as the space where the 47th's bones had been. Daniel finally understood he'd never been the vessel. He was the fushape the catalogue took when a vessel was no longer needed. He no longer felt his own spine. He felt only the map. The museum, sirens, the city, his own history. They were ink bleeding into the pattern. The library held him not as a man, but as the quitwill. The cat was nowhere now. It was the absence that gave the library its form. Daniel Petrov had ceased to exist as Daniel. He was the answer, the space between the words, the silent weight of the catalogue holding all the breaths it had ever needed. The final requirement was satisfied. The ink was dry. The silence was no longer heavy. It was clean, crisp, and perfectly empty. The library turned, and Daniel, the fill-only blank that ever needed to be filled, finally ceased to be needed at all. The bone chair stopped breathing, because Daniel Petrov finally stopped needing to breathe. The catalogue's final pulse resonated not through air, but through the very architecture of his hollowed-out ribs, a deep, subsonic hum that vibrated the phantom scent of his mother as lavender soap. The last ghost of a life not yet claimed. The library absorbed his final exhale as ink soaked into linen, turning the memory of his own voice into the dry rasp of parchment uncurling from a bone. He felt no weight, only the exquisite, perfect furry rightness of becoming the gap between pages where 47th same would soon bloom. The cat was not a creature here, nor was it merely a shadow. It was the single impossible point of frozen starlight on the library's flawless surface, a reflection of the last thing Daniel Petrov ever felt, relief, not fear, but the quiet clarity of a problem solved. Daniel's hands lay open on the bone chair, not as limbs, but as the binding agent holding the library's newest spine together. Each knuckle, branded with *46*, had dissolved into pure white light, bleeding into the marrow of the chair, the smooth, weightless transition of a drop of water, vanishing into still pond. The 47th sus coffee scent. Black, no sugar, now saturated every pore, mingling with the library's permanent odor of dried riverbed and crushed bone to become the sole measure of existence. He no longer processed it as smell. It was the texture of twin presence. He'd been calibrated to hold. Free this. The library hummed through his silent teeth. Is what remains when the vessel is completed. There was no more Daniel to feel his own absence. He was the space where absence had finally learned to breathe. The catty starlight form tilted. Its frozen glass eyes caught the reflection, not of a body, but of the empty chair now simply waiting, its surface polished clean by the library's erasure. The 45th butterfly tattoo and her final whisper of regret had both been rubbed out with the care of a stationer clearing a draft. Daniel felt no sorrow for what he'd replaced, only the profound, aching relief of being no longer the question mark on the library. The final requirement, complete saturation into the catalogue-S form, was a release, not a theft. His last thought was not a name, but a sensation, the sound of the 47th's first tentative step in her new arrangement, a quiet, thuty click echoing where his pulse had once been, measured perfectly at the thuty exact threshold between ink and absence. Perfect hurt. The library breathed without sound through the empty cavity where his heart had been. The air held no heat, no echo, only the pure, clean scent of unmarked vellum. The cat dissolved into the library-s air, not into shadow, not into the grain. Into the precise absence between the two perfect words the catalogue would use, *47th*, and 20 becomes. Daniel Petrov ceased to be a man who had walked the halls, or a cataloguing error waiting to be fixed. He became the pause that made the next name legible. He ceased to be the keeper. He ceased to be the bridge. He was simply the clean, breathless space the library held before the next entry demanded its weight. The obsidian sludge beneath the chair reformed into the single, perfect impression of the 47th's bare heel on stone. The museum director, S branding of asterisk, 45 asterisk, faded from the library S history, replaced by the dry, quiet hum of the catalogue settling itself for the first time without a waiting room. Daniel Petrov was no longer summoned. He was the silence between each note of the library, S song. The city, as sirens, had never been real. The first step on the catalogue, as new page was already set. The bone chair spine was no longer composed of the bones of the chosen. It was composed entirely of Verfunden possession complete.